So, the first thing we ought to do is think about the purpose of the investigation. And I just, when we do stuff, we want to know why we're doing it. The purpose of an investigation into a safety incident is not to place blame. It's not to make sure that the right people are financially responsible. It's to figure out what we can do to not have that ever happen again. Okay? We want to learn from this. You've probably all met the employee who has worked for you for 20 years, but he still makes one-year-old employee mistakes. Okay? I ran into teachers who still taught the same lessons that they taught when they started 20 or 30 years ago. Those people are crappy, and you know why? Because they haven't learned anything. They haven't allowed their experience to impact their performance. Our experience in safety needs to impact our future performance, and the only way to do that in a positive way is to identify the root cause of the occurrence so that we can address that root cause. The importance of root cause is that our tendency is to deal with the symptoms of the problem because it's easier, it takes less work, and it's a whole lot quicker. But when we do that, the problem recurs. So, several years ago, I have two daughters. The oldest daughter named Katie. Katie is a lot like me. Emily is, I don't know where she got born from. Emily is an extrovert and very socially adept and a creative person. She ended up with a degree in sculpture. My oldest daughter, she ended up with a degree in marine biology, and she is a student by heart. She loves animals, but she's really a student. And so, even when she was small, she took this approach, kind of a studious approach to life. So, I only have daughters, I don't have sons, so the daughters have to help Dad out, do whatever. So, the task, the particular day, is weeding the garden, okay? And the weeding approach that I demonstrated to my daughter was to take this instrument that had a long rod with a little fork at the end, and you dig down and you get the root out and you pull the weed out, from the bottom up, basically. So I demonstrated this difficult procedure to my daughter and then left her to her own devices. She determined that there was a much faster way to accomplish the purpose. She just cut the tops off. Now, we know that doesn't work. But to her, it looked like it worked just fine. She mutilated that plant. There was nothing visible above the surface. She, to her viewpoint, addressed the issue, which was those ugly yellow flowers which needed to be removed. What she did not realize is that if the root of the problem is not addressed, the plant will grow back. The conditions that create the yellow flower are still present in the ground. When we deal with just the symptoms of a problem, we have problem recurrence because we haven't gotten the root out. Right? So we want to investigate every opportunity to find the root cause so that we can eliminate or at least dramatically reduce the occurrence. So I hope that you have noticed that I have religiously avoided the use of the word accident. I have not described, if I've been consistent, and I've tried to be, I have not used the term accident to describe what happened when somebody got injured. And I think it's worth a slide and a few moments of our time to just reflect on the fact that when we use the term accident, industrial accident, that we, maybe subconsciously, we let ourselves off the hook a little bit, both in terms of how we investigate and how we even think about safety. And here's what I mean by that. Accidents are caused by random chance events. Random events don't have discernible causes. And nobody can do anything about random events. So if I follow that logic, I undermine the whole concept of safety by calling it an accident, because I can't do anything about accidents. Stuff happens, you know? So I've been referring to these events as incidents, not accidents, on purpose, because I'm trying to live my life according to principles, and those principles tell me, and the reality of the world is that people get hurt not by accident, but by design. And it's our job to figure out what factors influence the design of that situation in life that that person felt themselves in that led them to be injured. Just forcing yourself to use that language will help you do a better job of talking about safety and investigating what happened in a safety incident. Okay. Now, I have this circle of events that needs to take place in an investigation. And so we'll just take a slide to talk about each of the items that are part of an incident investigation. The reason it forms a loop is because it's really a plan, do, check, act loop. It's really I designed the process so this wouldn't happen. What happened? You know, they did it, and then we had bad results. So I need to check into things, and I need to take action. And that action needs to inform my future planning so that I don't have any more of those kind of problems. Okay? So there's a reason why it's a loop and not a chain. It's supposed to inform our opinions so our planning the next time around is better. We're supposed to learn from these experiences. All right. So the first thing is that we got to know when people get injured. You'd think that'd be easy, but unfortunately it's not. Sometimes the supervisor will hear Ralph. He comes in on Monday morning and he's complaining about his back. He said, yeah, I picked up that box and I heard it, and that was Thursday, and it didn't get better, and it didn't get better. Well, I wanted to hear about it Thursday, man. You know? Now it's gotten worse. You've self-medicated, done whatever, and maybe now you got to go to the clinic, and that's going to cost my company money, and you're going to be off for a while, and no doubt they're going to give you prescription meds, so that's going to be recordable and blah, blah, blah. But if we had dealt with it on Thursday, maybe an ice pack would all have been necessary. So you got to find out about stuff. People don't always want to admit that they got hurt because then they feel like they're going to have to tell you they made a mistake, and you have perhaps not shown yourself trustworthy with that information and shoot them out, and they don't want to hear it. But then it gets worse. It gets infected. And now it's got to come out, and then it's worse. So you've got to have that culture that we talked about earlier so that you can be aware of injuries and illnesses. And obviously, our investigation of cause is going to be impaired if it's 2 or 3 days later. The circumstances are gone. You know, all of us, when we're investigating a problem, whether it's a quality problem or a safety problem, we're a little bit like Columbo, right? We're a little bit like trying to figure out who done it. And it's not really who done it, but how it happened, the circumstances around that event. And those go away. Forensic evaluation is tough. But it's really tough if it's several days later and everything's moved around and you have no idea what really was happening when that fork truck went around the corner and hit somebody. So, we got to establish a system of communication, and that system's got to live in a culture that people are willing to step up and say what happened. Okay, come on. There we go. Next, our immediate action after an injury. We take care of the people, right? We make sure they've got what they need to be safe. We take care of the witnesses. I don't know about you, but I had several people that were pretty shaken when Scott got hurt that day. Okay? The guy that helped him come into the office, I mean, he was literally shaking. Which is one of the reasons, by the way, just as an aside, you don't ever have those people drive them to the hospital. You call 911. Otherwise, you're going to be liable for an accident on the way, and they feel like they can speed without, because they got this guy in the car, and it's terrible, okay? And if you have a policy that doesn't prohibit that, you can be held liable for those kind of things. So be careful. So you take care of people. People care is first, immediate, after an injury. But you also are interested in the forensic evaluation, the evaluation after something bad has happened. And so you want the witnesses to be separated out so that you can get an independent story from them. It's not like they're going to, it is unlikely that they're going to work together to create a story, but sometimes some of that kind of stuff happens. What did you see? What happened? And they start talking, and pretty soon you only get a mono version of the story instead of stereo. So, of course, you're going to preserve the scene, particularly with a serious injury, and make some collection of evidence and so forth. We do have an obligation to report serious injuries to OSHA. Come on. There we go. And then we're going to plan the investigation. Some investigations are big, hairy deals. Others are relatively minor. But we should make sure that we know who's responsible to investigate, what they're supposed to be doing, make sure they're capable of asking the right questions and collecting the right information. Maybe it's equipment related, and we need to collect the information about that equipment. When was the last time it was PM'd? What's the serial number on it? Maybe it malfunctioned in a way that somebody else is responsible. But we need to investigate, and we need to plan an investigation so we've taken care of the key things. Some accidents, not accidents, that's a swear word in my book. Some injuries, some incidents are so serious that outside parties are going to be involved. And so fire department, the police department, some insurance investigator, people are going to want to know. And they have interest in objective evidence that have needed to be collected by you. So we want to make sure that those things are planned. And waiting until a bad thing happens is not what you should do. Obviously, you should prepare for this ahead of time so that you can take care of it in the best way possible. And then we make sure that we collect the data. In some circumstances, particularly with like fork truck incidents and so forth, you want to actually have a concept of what the layout was, where people were standing, what was going on. We've taken the extreme step in our business that we have video cameras over the whole shop. We have video of every, I don't know about square inch, but certainly square foot of the facility, where all the people are all the time. And it's amazing how impressed the customer can be if we say, yes, we had this problem and we know exactly what happened because we watched it on video. We watched how that person failed to do this, or this part got moved here instead of there, got put on the bad pallet instead of the good pallet, or whatever. We can see it on video. That's an extreme solution. You've got enormous amount of square foot. We only have about 450,000 square foot. I don't know what you guys got, but I've been in some of your facilities that are pretty big, and they're sparsely populated. You know, down a main aisle, but there's lots of places where there's not so many people. Probably wouldn't work for you. But you want to capture as much information as you can in the data collection phase because you're interested in finding out not who, but what happened. One of the things that is really problematic and troubling for people is interviewing witnesses after a significant safety incident. First of all, it's usually a very emotional time. And people feel guilty even just being a bystander to something really bad happened, especially to somebody that they consider a coworker. So you've got to take special care to get accurate witness accounts. You know, most of your crime shows that you watch on TV, you know, there's CSI kind of programs where they do everything by science and they don't really care what people say. But most detective work, if you actually talk to a real policeman or a real detective, most of the detective work is actually gathering evidence initially and then talking to people. And so, talking to people is really important in a safety investigation. And it's really important to talk to people pretty promptly after the thing happened. You know, it's painful to recount sometimes, and it's troubling to just logistically get people able and willing to sit down and talk about what just happened. But it's important. And you want to be kind and compassionate, but you need to gather the facts of what they saw, where was this, what was happening then, you know. You want to do it privately and one at a time. It's not an interrogation, but we want to show direct and personal compassion. We also want them not to be performing for an audience. Okay? And my personal belief, and I don't put it on there in the slide, but my personal belief is that typically the supervisor is not the best person to ask, because it could have been the supervisor's activities that led to the issue or some decision that he made about somebody doing something that had some risks to it. So leave the supervisor out, have it be investigated by someone else who has no iron in the fire of this particular incident. An independent person, somebody that's familiar with what's going on, somebody that knows your company and knows your organization and knows your processes, but somebody that's not directly in the hierarchy of that individual. So, informal tone, compassion. You don't want to ask a question like, so Ralph was standing right here, right? You know, no. So where was Ralph standing? What was he doing? You know, what was happening at the time? Who else was around? You know, they got to have fill in the blank kind of questions, not yes, no, of course. You know, of course he was doing that. Yeah, we followed the rules. Did you follow the rules? Of course I followed the rules. Don't ask directive questions. Bad technique, and you won't find out anything but what you think. Listen and take notes. Don't blame. So you did that? You mean to say you did that? You know, that's crazy. They're not going to. You want people to be open? Anyway. And I think it's good technique to ask some questions that you've already heard somebody else say the answers to. Kind of cross-check. Make sure that they're not just making a story. There are some people that want to chime in and offer help that don't have anything to do with it and didn't see anything. They just feel like that's what they ought to do. They want to be involved. There's some notoriety in being involved. There's people that like attention. We just got to weed all that out. Okay. Then we analyze the data. There's a whole section coming on root cause analysis, and we're going to talk about that. But for now, that's the purpose of analyzing data, is to identify that chain of cause and effect that led to the incident. I recommend that more than one person look at the information that's collected to try to make sense of it from different perspectives. One of the things I learned by being a plant manager is that maintenance is really smart. They really know what's going on. They know how frequently stuff breaks down, what kind of bad things happen, where the oil ends up when it's not in the machine, all kinds of things they know. And they know some stuff that even the operators don't know about how stuff works and what can go wrong with it. And so getting a maintenance guy to help is sometimes a good thing. Obviously, we don't blame people. And there's a term in cognitive psychology called hindsight bias. And it exhibits itself in safety investigations two different ways. So the first is that when we initially come upon a scene, we make a judgment about what happened. And then what we do is we look for evidence to support our initial perspective. That's bad investigative technique, okay? It's like picking the cause and effect or picking the guilty party before you got all the evidence. You got to stay open, okay? But it's really, really tempting to prove how smart you were when you first got there by looking for evidence that, I was right, see? And that's just, we can't do that. So that's one aspect of hindsight bias, okay? The other aspect of hindsight bias is this. When people begin a course of action, so this is Ralph pre-injury, okay? Ralph is deciding to do something. He does not know what's going to happen next, okay? Yes, we judge his behavior as being wrong because a bad thing happened, but he didn't know that was going to happen, okay? He set up the ladder, and he didn't know that somebody was going to go through the door right then and knock him over. He thought he was doing the right thing. In fact, he used the ladder rather than piling up boxes. He thought he was doing the right thing. Nobody starts out thinking they're going to get hurt. So we can't judge them after the fact and say, you didn't know that was going to happen? No, he didn't know. If he knew, he wouldn't have done it. Okay? So sometimes we are quick to judge, quick to blame, because we have the benefit of this information about what happened after that they didn't have when they were making the decision. And we need to cut all that crap out and say, what were the circumstances in which that guy was operating at the time he made his decision? What did he see as the pros and cons of the decision that he made? Without knowing that it was going to happen bad later. Okay? It'll cut your people away much more slack, and it will make you a much better investigator. Okay. So, we talked about the desire to do root cause. So here's what that might look like, just as an illustration. So Ralph, my favorite operator, he slips and falls, and he falls in such a way that he sprains his wrist. So I'm trying to investigate. Root cause analysis is usually promoted and talked about, especially in the quality world, but also in the safety world, by a term called YY analysis. Sometimes it's referred to as the 5 Whys. Basically, you got to be a little bit irritating, a little bit like a toddler, and ask, why, Daddy? Why? 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 Why is that? And finally, you get frustrated. You don't want to talk anymore. I don't know why the sky is blue. Actually, I have a physics degree. I can tell you why the sky is blue. That helped me with my smart daughter. My artistic daughter, who's actually really smart, my artistic daughter, she didn't ask those kind of questions. She wanted to know why people did what they did, and that I didn't have a degree in. But here we go. We ask why. Come on. There we go. So, why did he slip and fall? Well, he lost traction on the floor. Okay, that's kind of obvious. Why was that? Well, there was this material on the floor that he lost friction. he had this hydraulic oil on the floor. Okay. Now, at this point right now, there are some of you thinking, duh, get them to mop it up, and they won't have any more problems. That's taking care of the symptoms, not the root causes. Okay? Besides, they got a lot more room on that slide. Okay? So we got to ask why. Okay, how come the oil's there? If I just clean up the oil and I don't deal with the causes, there's going to be oil there again. Okay? So rather than invest in housekeeping of this type, let's just prevent that. So let's find out why the oil's there. So, well, whenever you ask that kind of question, you're going to end up eventually routing into two directions. One direction is, how come it's still there? How come nobody addressed that issue? But you're also going to ask, how come it was there in the first place? In other words, what put the oil on the floor? So one question is, how come the oil is on the floor? How did it get on the floor? The floor is not in need of lubrication. So it got there by some means. What was that? That's one path of investigation that needs to be pursued. The other path is, how come people think that that's okay? How come we didn't address that when it first happened? Okay? Because oil on the floor, everybody realizes, is a preventable hazard. It is a thing that should not be allowed to persist. At least we all think that in here. Okay? So we have a couple of paths to follow. So maybe the answer to the question, as we look in the mirror and are honest with ourselves, the real reason why nobody mopped it up is because we think it's a good idea to clean it up, but we don't give anybody any time to do that. And maybe we don't give them materials. I don't know if you guys have a time at the end of each shift to clean up. We used to say we had that. Nobody ever did. And we didn't enforce it. And so people just finished their work, went to the time clock, and used that time to clean their hands, and then out the door. Until we got religion about housekeeping. But in any event, so maybe that's that. So how come the oil's on the floor? Well, we got a pump that's leaking on a piece of equipment. You know, I'm just making stuff up. I'm just giving you a path to follow. But the point is, you got to keep asking why. So the pump is leaking. So, okay, so it's out of the pump. So what's going on with the pump? Well, the gasket's bad. Obviously, it's supposed to prevent that leak from that union. Oh, well, how come? Well, they didn't replace it. Well, how come? Well, nobody reported the leak. That's one problem. The other problem is that we don't have any PM for that. We know that pump is going to have a leak at that point at some periodic interval because that gasket doesn't live forever, but we don't have any PM to clean it out before it creates a problem for our people. So now we're getting down to the point where we're looking at our system, and our system isn't adequate to keep oil from getting on our floor. And maybe we need to improve our PM system. And maybe we need to look at more than just that one pump to deal with our PM system. And why wasn't there a scheduled PM? Well, we can keep asking why. Eventually, we're going to get to the place where we're looking at management and saying, how come you made that decision? All root causes eventually end up with management because we made all the decisions about how that place is supposed to run. Where the resources go, who's got time for what, how much money they got, how much spare parts we want to keep in inventory, all that stuff we decide. Somebody in the company decides. And eventually stops at the top guy, the guy at the bottom of that pyramid. The leak wasn't reported because it was considered normal. It always got a little oil down there. That's a culture thing, right? So when we think about this investigation, we've identified a few things that we've learned about ourselves. And as painful as it is, you can't adjust your makeup without looking in the mirror, right? You got to face reality before you can do something about it. So if we're honest with ourselves, we ask, what is our management priority about cleaning? what does it say about our culture that we think hazards in the workplace that are fully preventable are okay? To persist perhaps for weeks or months, and eventually somebody's going to slip on that oil. And then, what are our management priorities associated with manning, staffing, allocating PM resources to deal with equipment issues? You know, it all comes down to the way our company is organized. And that's why we talked so long about that pyramid: management engagement, a commitment culture, a culture of commitment, and a formal system. So, as you ask why repetitively, every step in that chain needs to be observable by evidence. A witness statement, a corroborated witness statement, or a piece of evidence like a check of a piece of equipment, a record of something. And as you ask why, you're going to work through the operational causes to get to system issues which plague you, which create all kinds of things, and eventually to management questions. And that's one of the reasons why it's so vital that we have management engagement, is because you need to clip things off at least at the bottom. You need to have management support for those additional resources or that priority of taking a few minutes out of every shift to clean up. And if you don't have the spine necessary to hold people accountable to do those things, which will drive so many other improvements, then you're kind of out to lunch a little bit. I think we've covered these things. And so we've talked about this objection, but I felt like it was worth a slide. So you want me to improve quality, but you know, I set all these rules, people just don't follow them. Well, first of all, if a supervisor comes to me and say, I can't get my people to do what I'm asking them to do, I think that supervisor is bad. I mean, isn't it our responsibility to help people to understand and give them tasks which they can do? It's my job to communicate what needs to be done and why, what the consequences might be for not doing it to their own health as well as quality and all the other things, and to have reasonable expectations for our people. But if they choose not to do it, it's either a consoling issue, a coaching issue, or a disciplinary issue. But I hold the supervisor responsible to do those things. But we have to ask ourselves, can the rules be followed in the circumstances the operator was in? Did I ask him to do something that he couldn't do? Did I ask him to do something that he got told by somebody else not to do? You know, because it was faster? Oh, don't worry about that. Yeah, when you're up so high, you're supposed to tie yourself off, but it really gets in the way. It's a short job. Just got to change that bulb. Don't worry about it. There's lots of conflict. Humans are really good. They're good at playing games where there's risk and reward, where they got to balance multiple factors. Life is about taking care of, the peers that are watching me and making them feel good, my own sense of what I'm supposed to do. The boss has got an idea of what I'm supposed to do. There's outside pressures of time and productivity. And so all those things have to be weighed in a decision. Air traps, and was the worker's behavior reckless? Again, we're trying to put ourselves in a position of having a just culture. But the root cause is it's never the operator's mistake that's at the root. Because if humans are the root cause, then getting rid of humans is the only option. And unfortunately, we're not ready to roboticize our entire facility. We take corrective action, and we'll spend a little more time talking about corrective action after lunch. The goal here is not only to take short-term action to prevent anyone else from being hurt right then, right now, but also to take long-term action to pull the root out now that we know what's actually causing it. And we want to do it in a permanent manner. Just telling everybody to be careful does nothing. It has a short-term help at best. We got to change the system of how things operate in order to make things better on a permanent basis. And we have to monitor to make sure we don't create additional risks. And we want to report. We want to document stuff. We want to learn. And in order to learn, you got to make a record of what was decided, what was investigated, and be able to look at those records from a long-term perspective, which is one of the things I asked you to do when I asked you to look at your incident investigations.